Welcome to Halifax. This is the starting point of an over 6,000 kilometer journey across Canada, spanning over 8 provinces from here at the Atlantic Ocean just outside of Halifax Central, across Quebec, Ontario, my home province of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, into the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, and finally arriving at Pacific Central Station in downtown Vancouver into BC 6.5 days later, and this journey begins now.
So this is the ocean, and the ocean is the first of 3 trains that I'm going to be taking on this journey across Canada. The second will come tomorrow, connecting us from Montreal to Toronto en route to what Via Rail calls the corridor. And finally, last but not least, the Canadian, which will take us a majority of the way across Canada, past Ontario, into the prairies of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, into the Rocky Mountains of Alberta and BC, before arriving into Vancouver 1 week from today. Now, the ocean has been run since 1904, and although its route and stops have changed so many times over the years that I can't even name them all, this is the same starting point that passengers have had in Halifax since the station opened in 1928. And at 12:30 we would board the ocean, and at 1 p.m. we would depart, marking the beginning of an over 1,300 kilometer journey into Montreal, on schedule to arrive for tomorrow. Now later that night it was bedtime, and I'm in sleeper class, which means I get a bed for tonight instead of a chair. With that said, I'm off to bed, and I'll see you in the morning. Now, the ocean's journey is only supposed to be 21 hours, making stops in Truro, Nova Scotia, Moncton, New Brunswick, Acadia, Bathurst, New Brunswick, St. Foy, Quebec, which is just outside of Quebec City, and our final destination arriving here into downtown Montreal at Montreal Central Station.
This is Montreal Central Station.
So we would arrive at the Montreal Central Station, and Via Rail has a business lounge within the station. Now, the lounge doesn't have any food, but they do have a lot of soft drinks, and a few hours later, we would board our next train in business class, leaving Montreal Central Station, headed to Toronto Union Station. Now, within a few minutes, we were outside of Montreal, and it was dinner time. And although the food isn't the worst, the meatball dinner on special tonight wasn't the greatest. And I think that if you look at Rob's face, I think it tells you all you need to know about this meatball dinner. But this isn't the first time that I've taken this train from Montreal to Toronto, and Via Rail offers chocolates. Although I personally don't drink alcohol, they do give free bottles of wine in business class. And the meals actually can be pretty good, but that's been my previous experience, with today not being the greatest. And around 11 p.m., we would arrive 2 hours late in Toronto Union Station, marking the end of day 2 on this journey, which sets us up for tomorrow's departure of the legendary Canadian. Good morning from Union Station in downtown Toronto. This is the starting point for our next train, the Canadian, which has been technically running since 1955, more on that later. And the station of Toronto Union opened up in 1928 and is the busiest station in all of Canada. Now, after a quick baggage drop-off and a check-in, it was time to begin the next journey of over 4,000 kilometers of this 6,000 kilometer journey across Canada, departing at 9:45 a.m. out of downtown Toronto. So we would traverse across the Canadian Shield for a couple hours, where we would arrive into Parry Sound about 3 hours into our journey. And after that, it was more forest and trees until about dinner time, when we would arrive into Cape Row, which was our first real fresh air break of the journey, where the train pulls over for about an hour to refuel, resupply, and just give passengers a chance to stretch their legs. Now, a few hours later, the sun would set on the Canadian, and would mark the beginning of day 2 on the train and day 4 of the overall journey across Canada. Now, day 2 began with a stop in Sioux Lookout. Now, this was our second fresh air break of the trip, and today's Sioux Lookout is home to the junior hockey Sioux Bombers and has about a population of 5,000 people. And after we departed Sioux Lookout, the landscape quickly began to change, from the forest to the Canadian Shield to the lakes and beachfront properties outside of Kenora and into the prairies just outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Now, we arrived in the Winnipeg Union Station, and passengers have been experiencing this for over a century. But in that time, a world of changes have come and gone around it and within the city of Winnipeg, and the Canadian passenger train service specifically. Today's Union Station used to be the Canadian National train station operating exclusively CN passenger trains, specifically the Supercontinental. But on the other side of downtown Winnipeg was the Canadian Pacific Station off of Higgins and Main. But this station currently hasn't seen a passenger train for almost half a century. It was 1979, and Canadian Pacific Railway and Canadian National Railway were competing in the passenger train services and have been running for almost a century. Now, CN built the route that today's Canadian runs on, going along the Yellowhead Highway into Saskatoon and Edmonton, into the Canadian Rocky Mountains through Jasper National Park, and south towards Vancouver, but CP built the historic southern route. Now, CP's route starts in downtown Vancouver at the Waterfront Station, and it would depart daily towards the Selkirk Mountain Ranges into the town of Revelstoke, a few hours later through Golden, BC, into Lake Louise. Now, Lake Louise is a town that was built by the Canadian Pacific Railway because of the train route, and people took it there for the train. And it's home to world-famous skiing, as well as the famous Chateau Lake Louise, also a hotel built by the Canadian Pacific Railway as a part of the Canadian Grand Railway Hotels. More on that for another video. But after departing Lake Louise, the Canadian would take the world-famous Morant's Curve towards the township of Banff. Now, Banff was also built because of the railway, and Banff was the reason you took the Canadian on the CP tracks back in the day. The skiing, the outdoor winter sports, nature, the town, the people, everything. This was why you took the Canadian. And after departing Banff, about a day later, the Canadian would arrive in Winnipeg at the CP station off Higgins and Main. But in October of 1979, the final passenger train would arrive from Vancouver en route to Montreal. And after that, the Canadian government decided to absorb all passenger train service into a new government-subsidized corporation known today as Via Rail. Now, Via Rail would continue to run the Banff route on the southern CP tracks until January of 1990, when the Canadian government at the time decided to cut the route and only run the Edmonton-Jasper route, spelling an end to an era of train travel and history and the beginning of the end for the Canadian passenger train service industry in Canada, to the point today where the Ocean and the Canadian are truly just stripped-down skeletons of what they both used to be, unfortunately back in the glory days. But fast forward a quarter of a century, I would check in, reboard at around 9 p.m., and the Canadian would conclude the fourth day of this great Canadian journey, departing out of Winnipeg, past the skyline, and into the fields and the prairies of the night. Now, day 3 on the Canadian is my second favorite part of the journey. Now, I was born and raised in Winnipeg, so obviously the prairies is my home. And although I've never lived in Saskatchewan, it reminds me of home. The fields span for miles endlessly of wheat and canola, and there's just something so peaceful about it that I truly love. Now, we pick up a lot of speed in the prairies, going over 130 kilometers an hour throughout the day, racing across the prairies, and towards dinner time, we got to witness an incredible sunset on the Canadian. Now, we'd arrive in Edmonton about 2 hours late, but when we went to bed later that night, we would begin the final and most exciting day of train travel in Canada, going through the Rocky Mountains. Jasper was a town founded and built because of the railway. It was 1913 and Grand Trunk Railway had just completed their northern route, and they had established a mountain town along the Fraser and the Skeena River. Today, Jasper has a population of about 4,000 people, home to countless wildlife that wander into town regularly, and it's a heavy tourist town as a result of the regular passenger train service that it gets every single week in both east and westbound directions. After a 3-hour refueling stop, we reboarded the Canadian for a 9 a.m. sharp departure. And this is the beginning of the scenery that you wanted to see when you bought your ticket on the Canadian. Later that afternoon, we would pass through the township of Valemont and be en route to Kamloops for later that night. And although this is where the scenery starts to die down a little bit, shall we say, this journey is incredible start to finish. And although most people will laugh at the idea of spending just under 7 days on multiple trains to travel across the country when you could fly the same distance in probably under 7 hours, there's just something so relaxing, so comfortable, and so amazing, and so nostalgic about traveling through Canada by rail. It's a time machine. It's something all of my previous ancestors did. And although it is 2023 and train travel is quite outdated, I just can't get enough of it. Now, the next morning would mark the final hours on the Canadian. We'd pass over the Portman Bridge, passing by all the countless glass apartments in Burnaby and into downtown Vancouver. And as we begin backing into the final stretch of this over 6,000 kilometer journey at Pacific Central Station and into downtown Vancouver, as we begin backing in for the final stretch of this over 6,000 kilometer journey across Canada, finally arriving at Pacific Central Station. Let's talk about today's video sponsor, NordVPN. Anytime I go online, I use NordVPN because nowadays all websites are trying to track you and collect your personal information. So I turn on NordVPN to hide my IP address, keep my information encrypted, and I turn on their threat protection to keep cyber threats at bay. If you use public Wi-Fi while traveling or are looking to stream your favorite sports for free, you have to get NordVPN. Nord keeps me protected so I can surf the web and watch my favorite sports worry-free. And right now, Nord is currently having their birthday sale special. So every purchase of a 2-year plan, you'll receive an additional subscription time for free when you tap on the first link in the video description on this video at nordvpn.com/drive4oilers, and you will get the best pricing that Nord has to offer. It is risk-free and worry-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Again, at nordvpn.com/drive4oilers, and I want to say thank you so much to Nord for sponsoring this video. And that's it. 6.5 days across 8 provinces. We started in Halifax, went across New Brunswick, into Quebec, and into downtown Toronto, over the prairies in my birthplace of Winnipeg, into the Canadian Rockies in Jasper, Alberta, and finally into Vancouver. I want to say thank you so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more travel vlogs like this on train or any of my other travels, because I love sharing them. I also want to take a quick moment to thank all the rail fans that made this video possible. A lot of the shots in this video were powered by other rail fans who are out train spotting and are train spotting every single day. As hard as it may be to believe, I think these people love Canadian rail travel even more than I do, and I am forever thankful for them for helping contribute to this incredible video. And if you want to check out any of their work, there's a link down in the description. That's it. 6.5 days across 8 provinces, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.